There you are now. Welcome back to the garage. So we had a bit of interest in this Clubman GT and doing a little bit of work on it relating to the suspension. So one of the jobs the customers asked me to do in this car is to replace the conventional suspension with coilover suspension. So conventionally in a Mini, what we have is we have rubber cone suspension. So this effectively is the spring. This one had high-lows fitted to it, so it's adjustable in height. So the more you screw the high-low down, the higher up the car will sit. The more you attract the high-low, the lower the car will sit. It then has an independent shock absorber that sits in another spot on the car and gives it its suspension. So this absorbs the bumps and this controls the action of the spring. It's the damper. So this is the spring, but in the case of a Mini, they're rubber springs. We're replacing this whole kit for what is called coilover suspension. Coilover suspension is exactly that. It is a coil spring over the damper. So the damper and the coil spring are a one unit affair. The damper is now a structural element of the suspension. So it controls or holds the spring in place and transfers its energy to the suspension components. So in order to fit this, we have to do a bit of removal work first. We have to get this high-low out. I've already taken the liberty of taking both of the dampers and the damper mounts out ahead of this video. So you're joining me now as I start to take out this suspension cone. So let's jump into it. We're over at the top arm now and we've got you some of the best angles we can get. It's a bit dark in here because we're up in the wheel arch, but hopefully you're going to get a good view of what we're up to. So I have this top ball joint loose. Next thing is to get this suspension cone out. We need to get the arm out of the car in order to release or to get the cone out. So the best way to do that in place here is to loosen off the bolt holding the arm in place, which is a 3/4 nut on the outside, which you can see I'm loosening here now. And then slide the pin back in towards the radiator and that will let the arm out. Next thing now is just to get this top arm back in before we start connecting up the new suspension components for the modified kit. Now, one of the things I always do here is, especially when I'm fitting this coilover type suspension, is to pinch up this top arm first, because it's a little bit hard to do it when the bracket is in place afterwards. So we pinch this up first and then we will get the bracket into place then afterwards. So this just nips up the taper on the top arm and just allows it to hold. It just makes life a little bit easier when that ball joint doesn't just keep wanting to drop out all the time. So they give us a couple of components that we have to fit on. An adapter plate which allows the coil spring somewhere to mount. So there's a couple of ways this plate can go, and it's to allow for the offset. One of these is marked with an extra spacer, and that's just to allow for the offset that's in the top of the bracket. So you need to just make sure you get them in the right orientation when you're putting that on. So we're just going to put this ball joint nut on loosely first, just to hold it here. So this bolt now only serves one purpose, well, two purposes. One is to hold the anti-roll bar, and the other is to give this plate extra support. So it gives extra support up here. Now what I like to do here is just, for the moment, before we put the shock absorber in, we'll just loosely put that bolt in there, and it just keeps everything lined up for us, and then we can start putting that together. Now, just to get this top mount in, now there is a few intricacies to this top mount. Most of it makes sense. It bolts into the original 4 holes that the top shock mount would have went into, but it also needs to get 2 more additional holes drilled up the very top up here. There's 2 extra holes, and they're just to give it a bit of extra support. So what I always do when I'm fitting these is I get the 4 bolts in here first, and then I drill my last 2 holes when these are done up nice and tight and holding the mount in the right spot. The next thing we have to do is drill 2 pilot holes. So we've to drill 1 here and 1 here. They're just some additional support that adds to this shock mount. It has the 4 original fixings and then 2 more just to give it an extra bit of support. So we have to bore those through. The easiest way to do it is just with an angle attachment on your drill, or if you have an angle drill you could use that as well. And just use the hole for your centers and drill through. Next job to do is to get the coilover shock absorber into place, or damper and spring as it's properly called. The bolt can be a bit of a faff to get through here from time to time, so what you have to do is make sure that you get everything lined up nice and square and straight, and then it'll go together nice and easily. Don't worry about doing up that bolt straight away, you got to get the top bolt in first. So get the 2 of them bolted in first and then get them into there. Now they give you these kind of brass spacers, and that's to allow you to get the shock absorber to mount nice and true in the middle of the damper. What I have found through trial and error is it wants 2 spacers on the inside of the shock absorber, 2 of these brass spacers on the inside. It wants then 1 on the outside. So the kind of front side, and then just 2 washers. Kind of gets it all nice and central. Getting the 2 washers in can also be a bit difficult because they want to fall out the whole time. So if you can kind of pinch them with the shock absorber, it sometimes works. See if we'll get them first try here or not. Sheer luck, I swear. Same for the bottom now, just run up your nut on your bottom one. You don't have to really go super tight with these. They're a nylock nut and they're pulling in on a spacer bushing in here, so it's not super tight. It's just nice and snug. Okay, last job to do is to pull out this plastic knuckle. This is the wearing component of the old original knuckle suspension joint. We have to pull this out and put a cap in here, otherwise water will ingress in here and it'll rust the whole arm out in no time whatsoever. So make sure you don't miss that one when you're fitting suspension like this. So now you can see what I've put in here. There's just a normal grommet. I'll give you a look at what those grommets look like now in just 1 second. I just put them in there, and I put them in with just a tiny bit of super glue just to completely seal off the top of that arm and leave it waterproof, so no water's going to ingress in there. And that's it. That's the coilover front suspension done. Now what we'll do is we'll head around to the back of the car and we will fit the back coilovers. Obviously this is the passenger side of the car. The driver's side of the car is exactly the same. It's the same process. Take the arm out, get the suspension out, and then build up the strut mount. We'll give you a little look at that now. We're at the back of the car now and we have a much easier time than the front. Basically the coilover in this instance just replaces the original shock absorber, so no needing to put any extra mounts or anything like that. We just have to take the wheel off, get rid of the original suspension components, and then replace it with this nice coilover shock absorber. And then obviously same for the other side. So let's get the wheel off. So I'm going to go in the inside and I'm going to loosen off this high-low window now and get this high-low loosened off. So just loosening off this high-low just gives you a bit more wiggle room. Get that locking nut backed off and then loosen the high-low off. As I said, it just gives you a bit more wiggle room. To get this out, we have to drop the shock absorber down, but by removing or taking some of the tension off, it just means when you release the shock absorber in the back of the boot, it won't be under tension and it'll make your life a bit easier. This car has some intricacies. It has an anti-roll bar, which you might not have. The other really nice thing about this is it's an estate, so that makes my life really easy. I don't have to take the fuel tank out. If you've got an ordinary round nose Mini, then you've got a fuel tank to get out of the way in order to get at this shock absorber. We'll go to the boot now and let the top mount off the shock absorber. We have a double lock nut here to open. Back off the top one first. So underneath the car at the back, I have a jack just set up underneath the disc brake. In yours it might be a drum or it could be a disc brake, and it's just supporting the weight of the arm. So when I take this nut off, the whole arm isn't going to drop down from the car. When we go back around, you'll see what I'm talking about. So as I said, if you have a round nose, you've got a fuel tank and a bulkhead here, but this job in an estate or a van is a pleasure. So just literally loosen off this nut. It'll be tight for a couple of seconds as you're decompressing that bushing, and then once that bushing is decompressed, this nut will spin off the same as the locking nut. The other option here is you could have a nylock nut. It just depends on the brand of damper your car uses. This car I think has Spax dampers in it, so they use just like a double locking nut like that. So pop that out. Okay. Go back around now, drop down the arm and take the damper off. Okay, so I have the wheel supported. This is what I was talking to you about, supporting the swing arm here so that the suspension doesn't just drop down. Now it's not super heavy, so you can support it by your hand when you're back here and you're going working on it. So basically all that happens now is you just guide that down and the shock is coming out with it. Just be careful as it's coming down that it doesn't completely right off all the suspension. Just let's take some of the pressure off the shock absorber and we can compress it now and get it down out of the way. Okay. 9/16 spanner now. So just one 9/16 in here at the back lets this shock absorber off. So let's loosen that first. It's just 9/16 on a big flat washer. Take that off. Oh. And then shock absorber comes out. Now that gives us loads of access here to take out the original suspension. So this is the original suspension. You've got your rubber cone and your high-low, and then a big long travel arm, obviously, that goes between the high-low and the arm. So just break the high-low off the back of the arm. Come back that way. And then you can take the high-low out, take the cone out, and then take the arm out of there. Discard those, sell them on eBay and make back the price of your suspension. We'll do the same thing as we did before. We'll put a cap over that, the same as I showed you on the front. Everything is the same size, so the cap will work perfectly. Now, we've just put this back in place, and that is how the suspension gets converted here. Just make sure when you're putting this back in that you have that original setup. So you have a washer, a rubber spacer, and a washer again. That's a bushing to allow dampened vibrations to the car. These are offset, so you can see there's an offset here and there's an offset here. Those offsets need to match. So that offset is always going to be this way. It's bringing the shock absorber in towards the car. So putting it on the suspension arm first. Carefully just get it up in there. No need to tighten that one on there just yet. You want to get this up in place. Now sometimes these can be a bit narrow for the top of these spring mounts, so you just have to fettle it into place. They sometimes need to be tapped out a little bit with like a dead blow hammer or something to that effect. So let's just see what happens when we get up there in place. Are we close to the right size, or are we going to have to fettle it a little bit? No, fits in there nicely. Now same thing again, bring your jack back in, a couple of blocks of wood just to support this in place, and then we can go and put the bolts back on. Now, that's taking a bit of weight there. We'll go back in the car now and put the nut and bolt on top of that. The same as before, you have two different washers to go on here. One has a sort of a raised edge on it. That's the one that's going to drop down and sit inside that tower mount there. Then you've got your rubber bushing, which is going to slide on there. And then you've got your top washer, and your top washer has a kind of a square in it that receives the nut. Okay, in the case of this suspension setup, they give us a nylock nut, so that replaces what would have been on the other shock absorber, which was to locking nuts. So nylock nut. Getting the first thread on this can sometimes be a little bit of a task. What I like to do is just get the butt of my hammer and just press down on top, and then just use the spanner to turn it, and that gets you your first couple of threads. And then once you get a couple of threads in there, it'll pull away down itself. Now they do provide you with a little tab on the top of this to hold if the spindle of the shock absorber turns, but in my experience there's so much pressure on this from underneath with the jack holding it in place that I never have had to use it. How tight do you make this nut? Basically, you should wind it down until such a point as you see at least two threads outside of the nylock nut, basically. So keep winding it down, and there is one thread just starting to come up there now. One thread, and then we give it another full turn and we'll see a second thread. That means we've got full engagement of the nylon nut. Okay, so we've got two threads there. We've got full engagement of that nylock nut with the nylon, and we've got this compressed nicely. Could you go a little bit tighter? You possibly could, but you risk basically damaging the rubber bushings. So it's not required. It just needs to be tight enough that that nylon nut engages properly and that the bushing isn't flopping around inside in the tower. So it's perfect. The only other modification I would probably make if this was my car would be to add a strut brace across these two struts, given that two reasons. One, it's a Clubman Estate, and two, that it is changing now from the suspension operating underneath the car to operating up here. But I'm going to contact that customer and see, does he want a strut brace, and if he does, it's something we can make up from here. All right. Okay, hope you enjoyed coming along with us there as we installed a new upgraded coilover suspension on this Clubman GT. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to do the usual for me. Give us a like, it really does help the channel and boosts the amount of other people that get to see our videos. Also, if you're new to the channel, you are really very welcome, and I hope you're enjoying our content. If you're new and you think I've earned it, give us an old subscribe. Again, helps boost up the channel and helps us more. If you have any questions about what we've done here today, installing the coilover suspension, or you yourself have run into problems when you're doing it and you want a bit of advice, bang it in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer and help you out. Other than that, see you on the next one.